Thank you very much. Good afternoon, members. Welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Review of Standing Orders Subcommittee. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed. Can I please remind you of a few of the arrangements in the best practice guidance note? Namely, the microphone should be muted and video switched off when you are not addressing the meeting. Should you wish to contribute to any item, please write speak in the Teams chat function and you will be invited to speak in the order that I see you. Alternatively, you can use the raise hand function and I will do my best to keep track of those similarly. Should your question or issue be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that we deal with business as efficiently as possible. And of course, for a member or members in the chamber, either use the chat function, the raise hand function, or ask the officer to write into the chat that you wish to speak. As I said at the beginning, this meeting has been live streamed and recorded. I'd be grateful if members refrain from sharing material in the chat function that you would not be comfortable with being shared in an open forum. Usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. And if any member has to leave the meeting for any reason, can I remind you to either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time, or alternatively write leave in the Teams chat function and then join when you're able to rejoin us, as that will allow us to record member presence accurately. So we'll move on to the agenda. Item 1 is a sederant apologies and Chair's approval of members' remote participation. Claire, can you provide the sederant and any apologies, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. We've got one apology this afternoon from Councillor Hislop. There are 4 other members present on Teams, being Councillors Brodie, Crothers, Johnston and Wilson, and we have Councillor Thompson here in the Council Hall.
Thank you, Claire. Unsurprisingly, I approve of members' remote participation. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Do any members have a declaration of interest they wish to make, please? Okay, I'll take it that we do not have any declarations of interest. Item 3 is a minute of the previous meeting of 8th October 2020. Members, are we content to approve that minute, please? I will take it that we are content. So item 4 is future arrangements for the Waste Strategy Implementation Subcommittee, report by Interim Head of Democratic Services. This is a continuation of our discussion at the last meeting, and members will see in paragraph 3.8 that at the workshop there was preference for option 4, which is a subcommittee of the Communities Committee, and which would have a broader remit than just waste collection, since it would cover waste disposal also. This option is set out on page 12. Claire's here to assist as required. Claire, is there anything that you want to add to the report at this point before I open it up to members?
Thank you, Chair. Just with regards option 4, I understand the preference would be for an ad hoc subcommittee of Communities Committee.
Thanks, Claire. Yes, that is my understanding. So I will open this up to members' comments or questions, please. Adam.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I appreciate that there was a workshop held that some members were able to attend. My group had a discussion about this, and given that during the lifetime of this subcommittee we seem to have a lot of reports going to this particular subcommittee and then to communities and then also to FPT committee for relevant funding. At this stage we would probably opt for option 2. I think there's nothing to stop the Communities Committee creating a subcommittee if they so wished. But at this stage, I think that there's been an awful lot of member seminars and there's been a lot of information provided to elected members. I think, I'd like to put my thanks for that. I think it's been very useful information. But we can't forget this is one element of the Communities Committee, and I think that if the Communities Committee do feel that they require a subcommittee, they may opt to actually have a completely different subcommittee or look at a much bigger area of their spend. So I would move that we progress option 2.
Thank you, Adam. Are there any other members who would wish to make a comment? Malcolm.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think that option 4 would be my preferred option with this. I was involved in this subcommittee. I actually supported option for it to wind it down because I felt we were moving on to the implementation phase, and I think the implementation is going to be crucial, obviously, and taking it on the back of the situation before out in the West, where we half implemented a recycling strategy. I think we're going to need reviews. So I think a committee would be, a subcommittee would be a good idea. It's a bit unfortunate that if it goes to the community, a lot of the people with a lot of knowledge of it in the past not be able to take part in communities. But then fresh pair of eyes, and also we're going forward. We've got our climate change issues, and we're now looking at waste disposal as an important part of it, which again I think deserves proper attention.
Thank you, Malcolm. Certainly, my understanding from the feeling at the workshop, accepting, of course, and reiterating that workshops do not make decisions, was that there seems to me to be broad interest in effectively option 4. I mean, indeed, I think at one point, and there was some discussion, albeit briefly, about the potential benefits of a subcommittee that covered wider infrastructure issues as well. I think probably that is difficult to encompass within the task that we've been set today. But certainly I think that option 4 would seem to me to be a proportionate and sensible way forward, although I recognise that we're potentially not all agreed on that. I'll invite any further questions or comments. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to hear it, to listen to all the different points, but I'm the same as Malcolm when it came to this. We've had a quick discussion in regards to it, and reflecting back to the workshop. I think it was the leader actually mentioned, should it be rolled out to wider infrastructure as well? Leader of the council, that is, Elaine Murray, which I thought, again, like yourself, it was quite a prominent point to bring up and quite interesting. Might be something I'll look at later on some point in time, but certainly I think in the short term, the process was the only thing I had in the question in the back of my mind, but in the short term we should certainly put it to the full council that a subcommittee of, going back to Claire's point, Claire Rogerson's, a subcommittee of the Communities Committee should be established, and there's merit in regards to that. The spy in the bin was mentioned as well. Would we become aware of that? We probably would have become aware of that. Would have got stopped long before it got to the Communities Committee if that had been the case. So small things like that might be, all of a sudden they become big things, big hurdles, big obstacles that gain a lot of weight and momentum in the press and media outside when they could have been stopped very early doors because they've been obvious from an officer's point of view that the political support wasn't there. So no, I would support option 4 going forward, Chairman. That's my view.
Sorry, Rob, you're muted.
Now, there's a rookie error. I take it has to happen at least once in every meeting. My apologies, members. I will try not to do that too often. I take your point, Ian, that this is a bit of a circuitous route that we have to take, but I understand that we must recommend to full council, and full council then recommends further on thereafter. Due process, I think, being what it is. I have Stephen Thompson, then Adam wants to come back in, and then Richard. So, Stephen, you're next, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, having taken the feedback from the workshop, I think option 4 seems to sort of capture what the business need of the council is, just to sort of see through the process. So clearly all we're doing is actually recommending. We're not taking the decision to establish it, we're just recommending that full council take that on board to do that, so that communities would have that subcommittee. So I think option 4 seemed to reflect the more settled will of most of the members that took part, so I would go with that.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm doing better at remembering to unmute now. I will take Richard next and then come back to Adam, please. Richard.
Thanks, Chair. There seems to be a lot of support for option 4, so I would go along with that. There's a lot of interest in this subcommittee, so and obviously it would only meet when there was business for it to do, but I think I would support that.
Thank you, Richard. Adam, I'll come back to you.
No, cheers, Chair. I appreciate that. I think I'm probably going to be asking you to register my dissent on this one. On the back of Ian Crother's comments, funnily enough, being the same group as leader, you know, had there been an option for an infrastructure subcommittee, then I would absolutely have been backing that. I think that it's important to remember we have approximately a £10 million infrastructure asset class, and I think that proper scrutiny, and a focused subcommittee scrutinising the infrastructure asset class would be a good start. So it wouldn't just be waste, it would also be roads, which has obviously been a particular area of focus for the Communities Committee over the last couple of months and others. So I appreciate that it's not option 2 today, so I'll just ask you in advance of the recommendations, Chair, to register my dissent.
Duly noted. I do take the point, actually, as regards the potential merits and benefits of an infrastructure subcommittee, an infrastructure committee, potentially. It also strikes me that this is, what we're being asked to look at today is effectively, I think, as Richard said, probably short life and meeting when it's required to deal with the task in hand. And potentially some of this work is what we maybe need to look at for the structuring of the new council when that comes along, although that is obviously, of course, always subject to political decisions as well. But you know, might very well be something that we want to look at in some more detail, not least because alongside infrastructure there will also, we hope, be some big capital projects coming up, such as Dumfries Learning Town Phase 2, for example. However, that is enough from me. I will bring Ian back in.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Rob. So just come back to the comments that Adam made. I mean, we've got 4 options in front of us. We can either make it a hybrid of 4 or even make it a 5th, but keen to hear what other members are thinking, obviously. But I mean, that's why I kind of piggybacked on the back of Adam's initial comments, and I think maybe yours as well. But I think whether it's we're just looking at the names, actually. So it's a waste implementation committee is what we're looking at. So I mean, whether it's a waste implementation or an infrastructure committee that takes the delegation of that particular plus more, I'm not really that up and down about. It's about having a committee that has, because I think the roads, especially with the level of non-compliance we've had to infrastructure projects, the potential adverse publicity and things that may pop up in regards to the implementation of our wage strategy. I just think I'm adverse to broadening it. Maybe that's a conversation wider we could have at the full council. Maybe it's for now. Take your lead in that, Chair. But interested to hear what other members are thinking as well in regards to that particular point.
Thanks, Ian. I think perhaps before I come back in, I see Malcolm wants to come back in. So, Malcolm, you first.
Thank you, Chair. Reading through the thing, we're discussing the waste implementation, and that is what we were talking about at the moment. And on that basis, option 4, I think, is a sensible way forward. But I think ultimately, your the committee structure the committee that Adam's referring to for infrastructure is a goal. I think that they should probably be working towards. But in the meantime, here we are discussing the waste committee. So perhaps, as Ian's just said, maybe that could be a further suggestion when it goes back to full council.
Certainly, I have no concerns about that at all. I think probably that would need a little more work to understand, what sort of things it would look at, because it certainly would have a bearing on the delegations that we have to committees as they stand. My view would be that we have, I think, more or less collectively agreed already that there's merit in us continuing to have a pretty focused look at the remainder of the implementation of the waste strategy, because actually the greater part of that still, awaits completion, and we do need a vehicle for making sure that we've got appropriate scrutiny of that. So I think that's one issue, and I think option 4 suits that. I think that there is then also a very reasonable point about how we look at what happens with infrastructure and investment in infrastructure on our behalf as a council. I think probably sensible at this point for us to separate these two things out, deal with the short-term issue, but also have a look at the, I think perhaps the more strategic piece of work, so far as infrastructure in the round is concerned. That'd be my inclination at this point, I think. But I see Stephen wants to come back in. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And you kind of touched it on there, just with the separation between the consideration of a potential infrastructure subcommittee and what we're being asked to do today. So, while there's potential merit in that, and it would seem to make sense to reconceive of things with an infrastructure focus, I think it actually would be sort of bizarre to have gone through quite a structured process in terms of elected member workshops, gathering the views, reaching a kind of settled option, and then sort of trample all over that at the last minute. So I think it's quite right that we just respect the kind of process that we ourselves have kind of set up to reach this end. Option 4, and then reconsider the infrastructure as a separate piece of business.
Thanks, Stephen. Malcolm, do you want to come back in? And then I think we'll go to the recommendations. Malcolm?
It's basically just to more or less back up just exactly what you said, Rob and Stephen. At the end of the day, that was the point I was trying to make. We need to take the waste thing forward, get the waste thing dealt with, and then that's what it meant when, infrastructure committee would be a good goal for the future, which would require further investigation and discussion. That's fine.
Okay, I think there is perhaps a degree of consensus over that, perhaps not unanimity. But if we have, I think, no further members wishing to speak at this point, we'll go to the recommendations. So we are asked at 2.1 to consider the feedback from the further consideration of the future arrangements for the Strategy Implementation Subcommittee set out in paragraph 3.7, which I think we've done. Are we content to agree the recommendation to be made to full council on 17th December as option 4 in the table at paragraph 3.8? And I'll seek governance advice on the practicality of this as to whether it is then worth us adding to that we consider there would be merit in investigating options for wider oversight and scrutiny of the Council's infrastructure programmes and investment. I'll look to Claire for advice on that.
Yeah, I can certainly add that to the minute to note that as part of the future programme for this committee's work, and possibly looking ahead, as you said, to the new council. So I'm sure there'll be a review of the arrangements looking ahead.
Thank you, Claire. Adam, you want to come
in? I do welcome that, but I suppose it's just a point of clarity. Obviously, that we did have that workshop, and as Ian has alluded to, there was members who had spoken about an infrastructure subcommittee. So I'm just wondering why there wasn't reference to that within this paper, and that might have helped our deliberations today, because obviously I think it's an idea that's got merit with members of the committee. But obviously, if we have a workshop and that's been expressed, it would have been useful to have had a little bit on that today. So I just wonder if there's a particular reason why it wasn't included as within the options or even reflected within the paper.
Perhaps, Chair, if I could just come in. Yes, following on from the workshop, there was discussion with the relevant officers and the Chair and Vice Chair of Communities Committee, and I do appreciate that the reference in 3.7 is very simple. But I think the concept of this being an ad hoc communities committee, a subcommittee, could indeed take into account that the communities committee itself could expand the remit to include these wider aspects of infrastructure. I think there was support for the concept, but the reasons given there about just the road service review, the implementation plan is only coming to the committee in February, and it was felt that it would be appropriate, given its importance, that the whole committee took that forward throughout the coming year. But certainly going forward, the concept of having that wider infrastructure, a broader remit for a subcommittee, was certainly one that was welcomed. And so if it is, as Claire said in her introductory remarks, if it's an ad hoc subcommittee, then the Communities Committee, when the time is right, can expand its remit if that's felt to be the right thing at the time. Thank you.
I suppose, in a nutshell, the advice is we should walk before we can run.
So I think taking it to mean that, which I think is probably a reasonable principle at this point. Okay, so I'll just recap on 2.2 because clearly we have considered it 2.1, but we have certainly, I think, if not unanimity, consensus that the recommendation of full council should be option 4, as set out in the options in the table in paragraph 3.8. I had made the suggestion that we might also want to recommend that there's merit in looking further at how we would be able to scrutinise the council's infrastructure investment programmes. Hearing Liz, it also strikes me that there is in fact no obstacle to the Communities Committee deciding to do that itself anyway, although that would only be perhaps one aspect of infrastructure, depending on how you choose to define it. But members, if we are content that we go with option 4 and we make that additional recommendation, which it would seem is entirely within the gift of the committee to determine anyway, would members be content with that? I'll pause to allow full opportunity for any dissent, but it appears that everyone is content. So with that, thank you very much, members. We'll move on to item 5. So item 5 is the ad hoc bridge education report by Interim Head of Democratic Services. This is a procedural report, as the Education and Learning Committee has agreed to stand down its ad hoc subcommittee, but doesn't itself have the remit to amend the scheme. Claire is here to assist if required. Claire, is there anything that you want to add to this before we go to comments and questions, please?
Nothing to add, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, this is, I think, straightforward, albeit circuitous in terms of process. Are there any questions or comments on this one, please? I see neither hands raised nor comments in the chat. So if everyone is content that we proceed, members were asked to note the decision of the Education and Learning Subcommittee that the bridge is now operating as a council asset as detailed in paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2. Are we content to note that? And to agree to recommend to full council that the scheme of administration and delegations is amended to remove the ad hoc bridge educational trust subcommittee as detailed in paragraphs 3.4 to 3.8. Are we content to agree that? I will take it that we are. Thank you, members. Item 6 is amendment to the scheme of delegation of responsibilities to officers and statutory appointments and scheme of administration and delegation to committees. Report by Interim Head of Democratic Services. I almost got that out in its correct order. Again, members, the changes to the scheme of delegation to officers is a continuation of our discussion in October and is essentially a realignment of responsibilities to reflect changes in the management arrangements and the addition of the new post of Chief Officer RRR. As noted in paragraph 3.8, however, and provided full council agree with the FPT committee, there will be an important programme of work for us in 2021 as part of the implementation plan following the review of internal financial controls and procurement standing orders. In the meantime, however, we gave our agreement in principle to these amendments to the officer scheme, so our members are comfortable that we progress with these to the full council. Claire's here to assist if members have any questions. Claire, is there anything you want to add before I open up to questions and comments, please?
Again, nothing to add, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. So I'll open this to members' questions and comments. Adam?
Thanks. I think the first question I have is a point of clarity. There's a lot of highlighting in these documents, and in terms of the Appendix 1, we've got a lot of asterisks. So I just want to clarify, my understanding was that full council in July agreed the Communities Directorate management team responsibilities, as we can see in the two columns. But my understanding is that those substantive head of government posts where essentially services would lie within those teams. And I was just wondering if we could clarify that. And so essentially community protection will stay in governance assurance from here on in. Transportation will stay in neighbourhood services from here on in. And I wonder if we could get that clarified.
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely correct that community protection, community resilience and community safety is indeed part of the governance and assurance service. However, at the full council meeting in August, because of their alignment with the EU exit and the response to COVID, they are remaining with the COVID RRR team in the meantime up until the end of March, and then they will come into the family of governance and assurance. So in the meantime, they are still with the Chief Officer RRR. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Adam, does that clarification assist?
So I should probably ask my two questions the other way around, because Liz has probably actually answered my next question, but it was just to confirm. So then can I double check? This is actually was going to be my third question, but we managed to skip one, so you might be pleased about that. In terms of, we've obviously got yellow highlighting and blue highlighting. There seems to be a lot of blue, which stands for temporary arrangements in place. Can I just double check, is that for the Chief RRR delegations up until the end of March?
The Chief Officer RRR is on attachment, and therefore they go beyond the arrangements at the end of March. So, and that was our complexity in how we present this to you. So perhaps we need to do a wee bit of refinement for the full council papers. So there's two sets of temporary arrangements. One is up until the end of March, which is community protection, community safety and resilience. And then there's another set of temporary arrangements because the Chief Officer RRR position is in place for, I think it's 18 months. So it's a longer term, but it's still a temporary arrangement because the Chief Officer RRR will go back to a post in communities.
Thanks, Liz. Yes, I think that clarification ahead of full council probably will be helpful. Adam, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I'm just, obviously my first question was about the actual substantive posts within communities management, essentially here on in, and the exception was some of those services being retained with the Chief Officer RRR, which is completely understandable because, you know, I think there's a lot of senior managers working to more than capacity because obviously we filled that post and plan will start in January. But I think it's just to understand that, you know, so to me, the majority of things should be fixed within the scheme of delegations to officers now, but there will be those couple of odd services that will remain with the Chief Officer RRR until a time that they go back to those substantive roles. But certainly, and I think Liz said in our first answer to me was that those, the head of governance, the head of neighbourhood services, the head of, I feel like I'm in a test, the head of infrastructure and the head and community plan engagement manager, they were essentially staying the same.
You're correct that the posts are substantive, but during the time that we don't have a head of safe and healthy communities, these 3 posts have taken on additional services. So I assure you, we'll have a look. The suggestion perhaps is another colour might even help illuminate the complexity of the changes that are, some are very temporary and some are longer term temporary.
Okay. I think that the sort of main message for me is that, to me, it's a bit clear as mud at the moment, and I think it would be useful to try and clear all this up.
I take the point. I think if Liz is going to reflect on that ahead of full council, that I think would be helpful. Ian, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Adam, as well, for bringing it up. I mean, I just look at it in the more simplistic way that blue was temporary and yellow was fixed. And for whether it was to March, Liz, I suppose, or whether it was to the end of the attachment is a position that stops after 18 months from when we agreed it. And at that point, if it hasn't changed before that, we'll have to make a decision at that point. But and whether it's Richard goes back to the safe and healthy communities and picks up that position again, or maybe that's something to talk about away from here. But I didn't really put a timeline on it because of what's happening in COVID. It's fluid, to say the least. I just felt that it was necessary that these were ratified in some sense in a temporary position. At some point in the future, the council would look at that probably. I would have thought Adam Mercy in the summertime. I'm just thinking all this, so that's not my points for. But it just that was the way I kind of looked at that, and I thought, for me, in a simplistic term, the blue was temporary, the yellow was fixed, and we'd revisit that problem in the summertime once we get through the mass vaccination process with a bit of luck and start to normalise to a degree. A couple of points from myself, Rob. So we've spoken about when I looked at this, I didn't labour on it, but I certainly made a number of points in regards to reading this document. It was quite refreshing the last time at the last committee, and we've had a workshop since, and we've even met as group leaders to discuss this further as well. And I've relayed what my thoughts were in regards to this is probably so the council has a wider objection. I speak about the council as the 43 elected members, and that objective is to say, okay, we're at a point in time where we feel the council has to take back some of that authority and show a stronger level of leadership. And reading this document, I think this is where it lies, really. This is where we delegate the bulk of our powers from ourselves, and we give that to our officers. So taking that into consideration, I was looking at paragraph, it's page 1 of the appendix 25 of the report, for what I can see here. Paragraph 1.1 tells about the scheme of delegation responsibility to officers and statutory appointments. It clearly says that it needs to be read alongside the Council's procurement standing orders, financial regulations, scheme of delegation, administration, and delegation to committees, and the standing orders relating to the meetings. And it goes on, it talks about being openness, accountability, responsiveness and level of democracy in that particular paragraph. So when I was reading through this, if this is the key document, which I do think it is, this has to be amendments. This is not the place to make the amendments, I don't think, because I think there still needs to be a further piece of work and further, I think, deliberations, but at whatever political level in regards to what the wider vision is and how these changes should be made, probably further discussion at full council, certainly. But if that's the case, I think potentially when it comes to councillors and their responsibilities, so an ordinary councillor through to a senior councillor through to the most senior being a leader and leader and deputy at this moment in time, what do we as a council expect their role to be? What authority do they have? Delegate come back about even to chairs. Can the chair put on an agenda and say, listen, this agenda it needs to be on blah, blah, blah. As it stands, that authority is not there, or it's protracted, to say the least. It's a culture, we spoke about that last time, where it may well happen, but ultimately the authority, we give that authority away as the council to our officers, and we allow them to tell us whether it's appropriate or actually can we actually make a simple decision like that, as simple as an agenda item on a committee. So this, I think maybe, so I spoke at 1.1 that the different suppose what's the best? So the different protocols we have in place for like standing orders, financial regulations, is the way we delegate that. There's possibly a fifth there for me, Chairman, is what I'm thinking. Needs wider and further discussion in regards to that, the clear role of the councillors and what the decisions they can actually make at a different level. That's what I'm thinking, that there is wider work. So a particular point, so I'll come back to that. Keen to hear what other members are saying as well, obviously. So, but for maybe, I know it's for yourself, Liz, or if it's for Claire. So at page 22 of the report, so you both know that I've been going on quite a bit about member support. So I noticed that, so I did read this in context with the previous paper we had as well. So page 22, the appendix 46 of the report, you've got your Director of Communities and the remit to the Director. So as it outlines, so that you've got a Chief Executive Officer delegates from him. He has line management and oversight over all the directors, and so it's delegated through him. And you've got a governance and assurance, and that's outlined in yellow. And it talks about the responsibilities, and it talks about legal, it talks about licensing, committee services, including member training, election management, and so on and so forth. You can read that for yourselves. So it's the member training, including member training, and there's no mention of support, which I'm quite clear there was in the one previous, because I went back and read it. So in the previous draft we had, there was member support there. So I went to try and find that through the rest of the report and what that looked like. So I ended up on page 38 of the report, or 62, Chairman, it is, of the appendix. So if you go to page 61, it's classified as democratic services. It comes under. Just at the bottom of that page 61, you turn over the page and you're at 4.15.23. So I'm hoping we've been too protracted here, but it says provide assistance to members by provision of appropriate accommodation, facilities, training and support. So it touches on it there, but democratic services isn't mentioned at all whether there's a change here, just the way I'm reading it, maybe it does need tidied up. It's just clarity in regards to that, Chairman. That was my particular point, because I have got an agenda here. It needs to be driven probably away from this committee as well, so wider discussions to come back and see what we're thinking at full council in regards to potential changes to either this document potential, or do we add another document that outlines clearly the role, responsibilities of councillors at all levels and what decisions they can actually make, Chairman. So that was, so hopefully I've outlined that okay. So it was about page 22, governance and assurance. It doesn't refer to member support in there, but it does on page 38 under democratic services 4.15.23 from the notes, Chair. If we can get that answered, then maybe interested to hear what other views are. Thank you.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks, Ian. Liz, can we clarify as regards that point on member support and where that falls in the scheme, please?
Yes, certainly. 4.9 is simply a summary, which is then more detailed by individual services later on in the scheme. So 4.9 doesn't mention everything that's in these bullet points, but if members felt that member support was something that you particularly wanted mentioned in the summary, we could add that in.
Okay, I think that's helpful. I have no objection to it being included. Clearly, a summary will not include everything, but I'm perfectly content that we should include it if members are so minded. Stephen, did you want to come in? Or were you just commenting on the colour coding?
Yeah, I was just trying to be sort of helpful in terms of using maybe 3 instead of 2 colours for the time scales. There was a point that I was going to touch on. I think I raised it at the last meeting, and it was just to do with the fact that we don't actually touch on the likes of the level of the Treasury management codes here, but we do touch on the scheme of delegation. So it was really just to reflag that up. I'm sorry, I seem to be suffering from static. But it was really just to reflag that it's not clear from the scheme of delegation the particular separations between management of the pension fund within the Treasury management codes, although we did take a decision at the pension subcommittee to make sure that certain borrowings or transactions wouldn't happen again. So how we address that through this piece of work, I'm not entirely sure, but I think some notes were taken the last time that were hopefully going to at least address that in some fashion.
Thanks, Stephen. So I would take that to be either part of or associated with the further work that we need to do, if I've understood this correctly. I mean, effectively what we've got here today is basically housekeeping arising out of decisions that have already been made by the council, but do have to be reflected in the scheme of administration, scheme of delegation, etc., so that everything is reflects the actual situation and how our authority is being delegated to officers to exercise on our behalf. But there is, as Ian quite rightly says, a piece of work to be done, not least arising out of the FPT reviews and the implementation plan to come forward on them, again, depending on the decisions at full council, which of course has primacy in everything. But I would take it that we will need to do that more detailed work then, as part of that overall implementation of the changes we need to make, resulting out of the reviews. Adam, I see you wanted to speak and then you said you didn't. I'll offer the opportunity anyway.
Sorry, take me a minute just to clarify. I suppose that the main thing is there, I think Ian said a lot, and a lot that wasn't on the agenda, and I don't necessarily agree or disagree with it. I think that there's certainly points there. I think there's also some work out of the FPT review that happened that in due course we should reflect. But I mean, Ian sort of said about a further piece of work. I think I would like to be quite clear of what that further piece of work entails, what does it involve, what does it include, because this document is sacrosanct. I think that there's two documents that are sacrosanct in the council, this one being the scheme of delegations to officers and also the scheme of delegations to committees. We can change these however way we want, but I think on the whole they have been working. And these documents also allude to others such as the financial codes, treasury, which Stephen had mentioned, because they also help to implement this, but obviously apply across the board to all officers and to all council staff. So I think I'd like to be quite clear of what that further piece of work is and what we are trying to achieve. Obviously, as members will know, there is a particular recommendation within the FPT review about trying to not necessarily simplify this document, but make it more user-friendly. There's a suggestion within that on how to do it, but that is just one suggestion. There are other ways to do it. Now, that might be the piece of work that Ian's referring to, but I just think I would like to be quite clear of what exactly are we looking at, what exactly are we trying to achieve.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Ian, I see your hand up. Do you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. So I'll mention it. So I know Adam and I have had a bit of a discussion in regards to a number of things around about this report as well. So I'll try and put it into context in simple terms. So we're saying that these have worked and worked well, fairly well. So I'll take it to page 2. We're all aware of this, and I think, as like I say, a lot of this probably offline and maybe even workshops, and it's a piece of work probably going to February, March time before we get anywhere near it. So it talks about the powers reserved to the council, and it goes general principles. But at 2.2 it says delegated powers should not be exercised by officers where any decision would represent a departure from council policy or procedure, or would be contrary to a standing instruction of the council or committee, or would itself represent a significant development of policy and procedure. And it goes on, and it tells you that there's a process here where the chief executive through the chairs and vice chairs can make a decision that could be expedited, and then it could be reported back to the council for further ratification or noting. So speaker comments, whatever that may be. Now, so if that's the case, look at the level of non-compliance has been in this council. Taking that, if you look at that at face value, and we're saying this is working well. So whether it's the trunk roads, non-compliance, I would say there has been, but we'll still to come to that point in December to see what level that's at. Whether it's in procurement across, in general terms, we discussed in workshops across the whole council. So we say there's non-compliance there. At the Audit Risk and Scrutiny Committee, we talked about the purchase of a Noble for 8k. Purchase cards were being used willy-nilly, some people would say, to buy personal items. So taxpayers' money, council money to buy personal items, put bonus points onto their own personal but to gain benefit their own personal records. So there's a number of things with that. I think we're scratching the surface when it comes to non-compliance. Taking that as a general principle, that should be applied and adhered to, I think, in order to take back authority, you could say, and for the councillors, the council to take control of the council, to establish those principles, make sure that we can see them, they are being exercised on a daily basis. We have to make changes. We have to make changes in order to bring that authority and empower the councillors back again, give that authority back to the council. I think we've allowed it without realising for a number of years it's been going on, and it's been being eroded and eroded and eroded. We delegate too much. Now, a high percentage of numbers of councillors are saying that. We've given away too much, and that goes right to the most senior councillors within this council. I'm saying we need to look at this, understand it, and take back what we need in order to empower ourselves so we understand what's going on. So I hope that kind of answers. So it's not about making a decision today, but that one small point, hopefully the other members of the committee can understand where I'm coming from. This isn't just some kind of off the cuff, and I can get into I've read this report, this appendix front to back on more than one occasion now. There's a number of points you could bring to it, but I didn't want to labour on this too much. But I just want to make the point, I think it's important we do revisit this, take it further, and that fifth level of delegation coming back to councillors to say, listen, this is what you've had in the past, this is the way it's worked, and be asking us how to empower the councillors. Okay, how do you want this shaped? Do you want a chair to be able to say, this item is going to the next committee, you can take that one off. There's at that level of the different ways of expediting. Should there be greater authority to the group leaders? Should there not? That's only an out there. I'm not even advocating that, but there's a number of different things. And again, I've mentioned this in meetings away from here. Should it better reflect the political makeup in this council as it stands at this moment in time, or should it be in preparedness for the next council coming in? So I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ian. Clearly, I'm keen that we focus on the matter in hand today, but obviously there are broader conversations to be had about this issue, I think. Stephen, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I'm sort of inspired by sort of Councillor Wilson's comment about sacrosanctity, and there's very much a this is the ideal. This is the sort of what should be inviolable, if you like, but this very subcommittee is here to change that when required, or to recommend changes to it. So it's almost like we're in a privileged position to make those recommendations to change what should be untouchable. So it's kind of sacrosanct in an Orwellian sense is that whatever it's agreed as is always true, if you like, but it changes over time. There is something about this being the ideal, and as Councillor Carruthers is saying, the reality doesn't necessarily match the rules that we set. However, they're what we should aspire to so that we know that we're aiming towards the ideal, even if the real will never quite succeed. It'll always be trying to. So I think we'll always see imperfections, but equally we should be constantly reviewing this so that we can always aim towards improvement. So I think that's more of just a general observation, really. Thanks, Chair.
So, no, I'm grateful for the general observation, which I think in the main I understood. But certainly, being a very straightforward person, I would certainly find it beneficial to be able to get to grips with proposals. And at some point, I think that's where we need to get to in terms of determining what further changes we think collectively or by majority are appropriate, and what those need to look like. I'll pause in case we have any further comments or contributions before I move to the recommendations. As I say, this report being primarily a housekeeping exercise to reflect decisions we've already made, but not wishing to have close down the debate on the broader issues, which is obviously of considerable interest to members, and I think we will come back to. However, if there is no other member wishing to contribute at this point, we will go to recommendations. So we are asked to agree to recommend to full council that the scheme of delegation and responsibilities to officers and statutory appointments be amended as referenced in paragraphs 3.3 and 3.4 and detailed in Appendix 2. with resultant changes to the scheme of administration and delegation to committees as set out in paragraph 311. Are we agreed? I'll take it that we are. So move on to item 7, which is scheme of administration and delegation to committees, role of the review of standing orders subcommittee, report by Interim Head of Democratic Services. So this final report, members, is an initial paper for discussion about the potential to expand the remit of this subcommittee. We had a conversation about this at the workshop, and I felt that there did seem to be both interest in and commitment to giving a wider range of issues and detailed consideration. And some of those are set out in paragraphs 3.3 and 3.4. So this is here to seek members' views in a formal setting. And if we feel collectively that this would be worth developing, there's also a proposed approach which is set out at paragraph 3.6. Nick is with us to assist if members have any questions. Nick, is there anything that you'd like to add to this before we open it to members?
No, nothing to add, Chair.
Thanks, Nick. I'll go to members' questions and comments then, please. Ian?
I haven't got too much to say about this one, Chairman. I thought it was a good way to report, precise, concise, and I agreed with it at 2.2 that we should be agreeing that. It's okay. The next steps are as per paragraph 3.6. Let's roll on.
Yeah, I'm very happy to agree that, I have to say. But would anybody else like to contribute anything before we, I hope, do that? Okay, I think that's sufficient of a pause to allow for folk to type or raise hands. So we'll just go to the recommendations in that case. At 2.1, we're asked to consider feedback from the workshop as set out in paragraph 3 and 3.4. And agree if amendment to the role and remit of the review of standing orders subcommittee is required. I take it we are agreed that that is required. And then 2.2, agree the next steps as set out in paragraph 3.6. I take it that we are also content to agree with that. Okay, thank you, members. I have no urgent business, so that concludes our business today, but I do want to say, just before we close, that you will see the next scheduled meeting date is Tuesday the 25th of May, but I would suggest to members that either a springtime or earlier in the new year date should be arranged. My suggestion would be as soon as the implementation plan is agreed from the review of internal financial procedures and procurement standing orders, that I think would probably be sensible. And I am also mindful that in addition to the wider issues that we touched on in the last but one item, we had also agreed that we wanted to have a look at area committees and the delegations to area committees. I think that piece of work has to align with their first meetings of the new year as well. But taking those things into account, it would strike me that an earlier date than the 25th of May might be a sensible thing to do, research to have a look at how we can accommodate that in the diary, and trust that will be acceptable. Okay, so with that, members, thank you very much for your attendance and your input, and I will close the meeting there. Thank you.
Thank you.